yeah, you get to see it from afar, and so there's that guilty conscience, right? Of like, I can't do but so much from my kitchen table in Ottawa, Ontario. Would I love to be in New York City and protesting? And I was having this conversation with my wife. Like, if I was there, like the craziness that I would be going through, or trying to go into, um, not necessarily be a hero, but to have a voice and extend a voice. You kind of have to find your space from here. I have to find my space from here, and try and get the same point across from afar.
Yeah,
It's interesting, right?
yeah,
And then living in Canada with people who have no real concept of what's happening down there. Like, they see it in the news, but like, you learn Canadian history, right? You don't really learn about civil rights and things like that. Um, so it is fairly surprising, for them to see just how much is going on and how crazy it actually is, and what the point of it all is, right? Again, every country has their own issues, and here in Canada, it's more with Native Americans, and taking land, and things like that. But um, when you look at it from the outside looking in, it's a different perspective.
definitely. Now here's a it's interesting that we're talking about this right now because you're a New Yorker, like you said, New Yorker that moved over to Ottawa um,
Yeah,
a couple of years ago, and you said that the fact that you're living in Canada didn't have to do with the fact that you were that Trump got elected, right? Because a lot of people have been saying, "Oh, I'm going to Canada because Trump got elected." That's not you. You just happened to go from Seton Hall University to Pace University, and then you just met your wife, and you guys moved up there. Um, and here's a post that not a post, but there was an article written on NPR, and somebody from Canada wrote this reply to a Ohio representative. So this Ohio representative is called Nino Vitali. He's a Republican. He basically said, "Hey, no, you should not get tested for the COVID-19 because he's
yeah.
following what the I don't know if you heard about this, but he's following what Trump has said. Like, the more testing we get, the worse off we look, which is bizarre to begin with.
Well,
But
you know what? He's right. He's not wrong, and that like, it actually makes actual sense, right?
yeah, yeah. But with that being said, he's basically calling, hey, let's not get tested anymore, right? So somebody from Canada said, I don't know who this person is, but she said, thankfully, I live in Canada. Have a good time dying. It appears you are all determined that is your freedom to do so. Glad our border is closed.
Yeah. So we went for a drive. We went for a drive last week.
Yeah.
Um, what was it? Friday, I think. We just took the girls out, and we drove by Parliament Hill, and a candidate. So it was candidate weekend. And so we drove by Parliament Hill, people out the wazoo, right? And just protesting Trudeau for having to wear masks, having to worry about the vaccine in the first place. We shouldn't have to use it. So like, that thought process isn't isn't specific to the US. It's worldwide, right? And I
Of
think,
course.
like, the thought that it's one of those things where I will only help my neighbor until it affects me. When it affects me, then I could care less about anyone else, right? And so, yeah, I want to be healthy. I want to, like, but like, for you, I could care less. So no, I'm not going to wear a mask because everyone says I'm healthy. I'm fine. You, on the other hand, good luck. And it's one of those things where, like, it's interesting looking at people's thought process and their thought patterns, and how they justify themselves being okay as opposed to anyone else. And it's a
Mhm.
weird, like, even with everything going on with social injustices, it's one of those things where I think COVID was the byproduct of COVID was the blessing of people being able to see something and spend more time digesting it, and not necessarily seeing it, going, "Oh, that's tragic," and then going and watching a basketball game and forgetting all about it. They had to sit there and watch a 12-minute video of a man dying because they had literally nothing else to do. Like,
Hmm.
they had a Zoom call that they want to be on. They had like work that they didn't necessarily want to do. Their kids are yelling. They just needed some time in the bathroom by themselves. So they watched a 12-minute video, which otherwise, any other time this has happened in the last 50 years, they only, especially within social media times, they only had to look at the first 30 seconds of it, and then they got to move on with their day. They didn't really have to then watch all the news about it. They could watch Friends or any other channel that was on. And that's not black or white. That's everyone, no matter the race, right? We didn't necessarily have to sit there and digest it. Um, the same with COVID. I think that you have a lot of people who have nothing else to do but give their opinion. And you have a lot of people who have nothing else to do but look at it, right? And so people who otherwise their thought process would have been kind of deemed unnecessary to look at, people are giving them the time of day. Which again, it's a right as a human being. You have the right to speak up and say things. But I think when you get into this, the level of politics, and you have the president and senators and governors giving so many mixed messages, it's like a death trap, right? Because you don't know which way to go. You're supposed to trust the president, but like he has diarrhea of the mouth sometimes, right? Um, and then gets into fights with people over things that have nothing to do with the issue at hand.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to, especially in a time where you get the information that you want. I don't have to look at a Republican site if I don't want to, and Facebook and Instagram will help shield me from seeing things I don't want to see. Um, and that works on both sides, Democrat, Republican, Independent, it doesn't matter. You're being fed the information that you want to see, unless it's for a joke. That's the only other time you're looking at the other side of something, is when you want to make fun of it, which is dangerous. But in a time where people are dying, I don't think you have to be the smartest person in the world to see that yes, it's less than 1%, and considering 3 or 7.5 billion people in the world, if 2 million of them die, like, but like if you happen to be next door to someone who has it, you really gonna not wear a mask?
Hmm.
Right? Are you really
Yeah.
gonna stake your health on your pride? I wouldn't. Like I'm prideful to a point, right? Because if I'm dead, I can't be prideful, right? And so it's one of those. It's an interesting thing of how far people are willing to take their ego.
So
Um,
you mentioned a couple things there that got me interested a little bit. So obviously we're talking about a little bit of the the politics over here in the U.S., but in Canada, from the American side, right? When we're looking at Trudeau standing and having a conversation in the media, from your perspective, how different has it been for you to kind of see the Canadian government kind of just pre-COVID, during COVID, and what you're seeing right now compared to pre-Trump, and now what we're going through with this pandemic through Trump here? What are the differences that have you seen in governments?
I think from the government perspective, you have more information being given in a very like civil way. Like it's just
In Canada?
yeah, it's conservative. So it's a conservative nation. Like no matter whether it's liberal or not, it's compared to the states, it's much more dialed down. And so it's there's 11 o'clock briefing every day where Trudeau stands up there and he says the do's and don'ts and what's going on, where they're trying to fix, what they're focusing on. You then have it at the province level, which would be the state level, where you have the governors giving their two pieces. Then you have it at a more localized level where the mayors are giving their two pieces. And so, and it's consistent. It's not.
Ah,
Yeah, there are
ah.
certain pieces, right? There are certain pieces that differ from like obviously living in Ottawa, or even like living in a Toronto versus living in a Nunavut, which population whatever, and it's minus 15 degrees in summer, right? And so the information changes to fit the area that it's being given to, but there's still consistency in the message. It's still take care of yourselves, take care of your neighbors. Like now, with that said, at the person level, people are digesting that information as they would please.
Right.
Um, but there's no, yes, you have some crackpots out there that are giving some crazy thing, but for the most part, liberal versus conservative, the information is somewhat the same. The plans on how to fix it, yes, may change, right? But like the facts are the facts. They're not trying to change the facts. And I think from that perspective, it's safer because we all have the ability to digest the same information. Now, how we digest it is up to us. It's our preference, right? But we have the ability to see all the pieces and just choose what we would rather ignore, as opposed to what you see watching CNN and Fox and then watching his addresses is like the same piece of information is given 14 different ways. And so no matter how you digest it, you're going to get a different equation out of it because you're not getting the same sentence over and over again. You're getting certain words that are the same, but there's a negative spin, there's a positive spin, there's a neutral spin. There's too much spinach going on,
Yeah.
and not enough just traditional news in terms of here are the facts. That's my job, is just to give you a fact, and then you digest it as you would please. I don't think we're I don't think in the States there's enough emphasis being put on um, using your educated mind to come up with a solution of some sort. Again, not everyone has to be the same in how they attack something or attack a problem, but we all have to have the same tools, right? If we don't have the same tools, then like it doesn't matter. Like we're all screwed no matter what.
Yeah.
So yeah, like from that perspective, just seeing both sides of it and reading the news and watching the news and seeing how the same piece of information is being changed from country to country. It's interesting. It's interesting to watch,
So
especially as an American who's trying to figure out like whether I stay, whether I go, like what. It's a tough equation to solve.
So we before we actually started recording, you mentioned that you've considered coming back down south to the U.S. Has this changed your perspective at all?
Well, it definitely changes the perspective. It definitely changes the time frame. I think where I was gung ho because we said 5 years we'd be here, and then we did assess. And I think hitting the 5 year mark, um, it'll be it'll be tough to decide because there's just so many anomalies, right? And so, or variables, and so between my wife's family, even my mom and my sisters and stuff in the States, there's just so many things going on to have to take into consideration.
Yeah.
And it's not as simple as just worrying about us and the kids. Like again, my wife's dad has MS. Her mom has dementia, so like have to keep that in mind. And as she's taking care of them because you can't have nurses, all these little pieces that kind of get thrown out of whack affect the entire machine, right? And so there's a lot more strategy going on in terms of what makes sense for everyone involved, everyone who's affected, and it's not just four of us; it's a bunch of different people. Um, so yeah, it definitely it alters the plan slightly, whether it's just from a timing perspective or more logistical perspective, but it definitely changes it.
So let's talk about a little bit about your journey because I know we just jumped in and started recording a bit.
Right.
Walk me through your journey as far as you spent some time in Senior Hall University, then you went to Pace. You were a marketing executive, and one thing that struck me about you, and obviously, full disclosure, we know each other from from 12 years ago. So this is pretty interesting to reconnect through Zoom. But I think one of the things that I saw on LinkedIn that kind of attracted me to this conversation a lot more, just because obviously I know you, but besides that, it's just your resume. You speak a lot about the diversity in resume and diversity in skill sets and diversity and just getting to understand and see new concepts and new skill sets is it's okay. Don't be afraid to just so talk to me about your journey and the navigation, the navigational lefts and turns and ups and downs and backwards that you've had in your
Yeah,
background.
like my life post high school, like pre high school is crazy, but post high school is like a case study in pivoting, right? And so, and like early, and not calculated. I think calculated later on in my career, but just because looking at the circumstance, I was like, well, I got to make something of this. But early on, it was just like between like finding yourself and opportunity meets timing and kind of taking advantage of situations. Um, it definitely, there's a lot of pivots. So like going to Seton Hall, like I went to Seton Hall because that was the only school I got into. Like it was like I wanted to go to Syracuse. I applied to Syracuse Business School, got rejected. It was like shit. What do I do now? And then got into Seton Hall and loved it. Like um, I think living on my own, like in terms of living in a dorm, joining the rugby team, like hanging out with you guys, it was like one of those things where, like, coming from a high school where it was predominantly white, I was like one of, let's say, 20 black people at the school. You kind of, and only getting into that when I was in eighth grade. So for an entire time of my life, I had one identity, and then I went somewhere else and had to pivot, right, and change my identity to fit where I was, for better or for worse, who knows. Um, and then going into Seton Hall and being uh, uh, taking both those identities and being able to combine them, right? And so having friends of all different kinds, having friends who I went to school with in Hempstead, who ended up being in Seton Hall, which helped life a lot because there was some familiarity there. I enjoyed it. I think the ultimate thing for me was that I just missed New York. Like I ended up after freshman year, living with my two best friends in their apartment, and the three of us living in a studio. And so I was in New York every day, and then taking the train or the bus to Seton Hall just got tiring. Um, and
Wait, so
so I
all that time seeing how you took the train from New York to Seton Hall?
for my sophomore year and beginning of, yeah, sophomore and beginning of, no, end of freshman year and the whole year for sophomore year, I made it so that I could have all my classes on like 2 or 3 days,
Holy
and I would
shit!
just be there all day, right? And I usually had it on like Monday and Friday, so that way I partied with you guys all weekend and didn't have to worry about going back and forth. And then I was back in New York for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, doing whatever I wanted, right? Um, and so it just got tiring. Like being
Yeah,
at school for 10 hours a day was just crazy. And
yeah.
then, so yeah, I transferred to Pace because one of my best friends, Ash, he was at Pace and he loved it and he said it was awesome. And I was always with him. And he was 2, 3 years older than me, but we ended up, I ended up transferring to Pace and doing that and love Pace, right? Because now I'm in the city. I have classes all over downtown.
Hmm.
And at 18 or 19, like it was awesome, right? And so you just take advantage of the situation. And then what ended up happening was I was always with them, my two best friends, and they owned a Dunkin' Donuts. And um, I just like literally was in their stores or in their apartment. So I ended up working with them, right? And learning, like, they're interesting because they're a year apart, Ashman and Lucky. Year apart, like always at each other's stores because they're the same person, just completely opposite, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So like, and anyone who knows them can attest to this, like the hilarity that is watching them two get into a fight when they're arguing the same point, is pretty interesting. But Ash is completely analytical, like can read a book, understand it in 2 seconds, taught himself how to code, like, can teach himself anything. And Lucky is the epitome of a businessman, of a salesperson. He can sell you water, even if it's your own water, right? And so being able to watch those two and learn from them in a real life setting while also going to school and having internships was probably um, the best thing for me, because I got to watch two people who weren't that far ahead of me and maybe didn't know more than I did, who knows, right? But got to see different perspectives and then their networks, which were similarly my networks, but it just gave me exposure to other cultures, other religions, other ways of doing business. And so it was one of those things where it all paid off. And again, it wasn't calculated; it just happened that way. Um, and then like just being home, like being in New York, it's the city that you can visit the entire world in a day. Like right between going to LES versus Chinatown versus Little Brazil versus going over to the Jersey side and seeing Little Pakistan, you can literally discover the world without ever having to leave the city of New York. So there's that. that beauty in that. And I've always like I like books, but I don't read them all the time. I again, I wasn't the biggest fan of school, but for me, it was more the people and the relationship aspect of it, and that's where I thrive, right? And understanding how people work. Um, Understanding the differences that can get us to the same exact point. There's always a similarity somewhere, and I think I've created my own niche of being able to exploit that similarity to figure out where I fit and how I can relate to someone, right?
Mhm.
And that's where the calculation has come in, right? And so through different internships and weaseling my way into different conversations in different rooms I probably shouldn't have been in, I've been able to learn a lot without having to necessarily pick up a book and prove it. I simply can be in the proof while it's happening and absorbing that way. And so that's taken me on such a ride of different roles and different responsibilities and piqued my curiosity to want to learn things that have nothing to do with my job on the outset. But when you dive into it, it's connected, right? You just have to find where that connection is. And that's what brought me to Canada. I went into banking for a bit, um, and to this day, like can't really explain that to people. They just don't understand it. Like, oh, you went from creative to banking. It's usually the other way around. But you know what? I found out that it wasn't for me, but I also found new skill sets and new confirmations on things I was already doing that just helped me to be able to figure out where my place fit in the business structure in the business world. And even now, I'm only 32, so um, like I'm still figuring out what works for me and what doesn't. But I tell my kids to just try it. Like who knows what will happen, right? You may fail miserably,
Yeah,
but you'll learn something, right? And then that thing will help you 50 years from now when you're doing something else. You'll remember. And I feel that way about everything, even relationships. Like, look at us, 12 years later, man. 12 years later, it comes full circle, right? It's just about patience. I don't think we're taught to have patience. It has to work right now. If it doesn't work, I want no part of it. And I don't work that way. I need one thing to work out of the whole thing, and it's validation for me. And it moves me to my next step, right? And that's all I'm trying to do is get to the next step.
that's true, man. I think when you put it into that perspective, because even right now I have a 4-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I'm always talking to my 12-year-old, actually both of them about the patience, right? My 4-year-old is just he lives in this world that he just wants everything right now. And
Yeah.
when I'm telling him, just hold on a second, or hold on a minute, or or we'll do this later. He's like, you mean like right now? It's like, no.
But you know what? I think we were lucky, right? Because and people think I'm crazy when I say this, but this is how analytical I can get in terms of behaviors. We had dial up. So we had to
Oh,
learn to be
oh,
that one
yeah,
little thing of waiting for whatever 25 seconds to get on. Now, yes, eventually we got high speed. So we knew but we knew both sides of it. We have the ability to be patient. And people think I'm crazy when I try and draw that correlation. But I'm like I think that incrementally that little thing changed how I see things. Because now you look at kids who have high speed, they don't know what it is to wait. They have never had to wait. And then they had parents who said that they don't have to wait. They can have anything they want just because they didn't want to deal with them. And I do that to my kids. Sometimes I'm just like, you can have whatever you want if you leave me alone for 5 minutes, right? And so when you compound that on all these little situations and issues we found ourselves in over the course of our years, they shape us.
that's true.
You can't deny it, right? There's no way that one thing can shape us, but something else can. And so, like to me, simply having dial up set us up to be able to, yes, use the world as our oyster because our parents didn't necessarily have internet. We do, so we had everything at our fingertips. We just had to wait for it for a bit, right? And then just that little progression of translating or transforming a society like is exponential. Like I think about it all the time where kids when you think about like HP, like there are so many kids out there that don't know that HP stands for Hewlett Packard because they never actually saw a computer that had the full word on it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
counts for something. People don't, again, I go on these tangents, but like that stuff shapes how we think, how we digest, how we inform, and definitely how we look at the world, right? And so
I mean,
like
to your
all
point,
these things are connected.
to your point, my daughter was a couple days ago. She was sitting on the couch right next to me, and I was reading something. I forgot what it was, and I see her on her phone just doing one of these. Like I'm like, and I look over, it's like trying to see what game is she playing that you have to really force the screen. And I asked her, "What's going on?" She's, "Oh, this page is not loading." I'm like, "What do you mean, a website? A website? A website?" She's like, "Yeah, yeah." And I look over, I'm like, "You see that little?" She's like, "I've tried that already." It's like, I'm like, "Listen, in our world, we had to like wait for dial-up." She's like, "What's
Yeah,
dial-up?"
exactly. And it's a crazy thing. Now, with that said, I think like my kids are so much more advanced than me. Like they don't know more because they're not old enough. But if we were the same age,
Oh
like
yeah.
they'd be geniuses and I wouldn't know what the hell was going on. And it's because like they do a lot of trial and error. And so our trial and error was different in that we were playing with blocks and different things like that. But they get to do trial and error with information, which is crazy to me, right? And so they're learning at a speed that they don't even really recognize. And for better or for worse, technology has gotten them there, right? And so it's that double-edged sword of like how much is too much. Um, and getting like my oldest likes to read paperback books, which I think is very interesting. Where my youngest likes to look at her app and read books from her app. And
Okay.
so and they're only a year apart, right? And so looking at that, I'm like, it's always interesting, like the science behind it. And I wish I paid more attention in psychology class to be able to like label it and figure out what it is. But like things like that interest me, right? And that's why I've gone on such these little tangents of experiences, just because I'm generally curious and trying to figure, and maybe not figuring out what the answer is, but at least figuring out how it works, right? And I think not enough of us were taught that, and I
Mm.
wasn't either. Like my mom ran a jail, so like she was very specific, right?
Your mom
Um,
is a warden.
yeah, she ran a juvenile detention center
Ah,
in Long Island. She just retired like two years ago. Um,
holy crap. That's
but
pretty
like
awesome.
very well. Now, with that said, though, here's the interesting thing. My mom went to school for home ec, like right, and so
Ah, so here we
like,
go.
how'd you go from homemaker to like being able to choke hold kids, right? And so it's like it's one of those things where like it's the opportunity presented itself, and the story is long, and she told it to me once. I don't remember all the details, and how she kind of made that transition, but it's one of those things of like just trying things and seeing what happens. You may not like it. Like I didn't like painting, right? But I still tried it.
Do you think that her journey kind of influenced how you perceive opportunities?
So that's interesting because I was having that conversation with my wife once. Because my mom is one of three, and my mom is the youngest and thus the quietest, right? And so my aunt, one of my aunts is like she's just like a bull. Like she wants something done, it's going to get done. There's like no denying it. It's happening. My other aunt was from the social standpoint, so she was very active during the civil rights. She ended up going and working for the Age Initiative, and has been all over the world. But my mom is very, she likes things the way they're supposed to be. She'll never admit that, but like that's just who she is, right? And so I'm the youngest by 9 years, but like I was a rebel. Like I just did whatever the hell I wanted to. I was a typical boy who like would get in trouble and then kind of deal with the consequences and go and do it again next week, right? Um, and I don't know if that was because in my mind, like I was like, well, I'm never going to get sent to jail because my mom runs jail, right? But like, but like, it's one of those things where I can't really say one way or another if her experiences molded mine, right? Because like especially when she was working, I was in school, and so she went to work when I got home from school, so I never actually really saw her.
Mm.
And so I knew that I didn't want to work that hard. I knew that for a fact, right? And so, and I still feel that way. I don't want to. I don't plan on retiring when I'm 65. Like the thought of having to work for 35 years is crazy to me. The thought of having to work in the exact same job for 35 years is crazy to me.
Mhm.
Um, which I'm sure for our generation is the exact same way because we kind of change jobs like we change pants. But like, yeah, I don't know. That's a great question and something I'm totally going to explore now. But I don't know if how seeing her has shaped how I maneuver within the world. Right? It's an interesting question.
Now, how about there's an article that you wrote on LinkedIn that it says protecting your fire.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was the one of the few that have actually done really well on LinkedIn because I still have no idea how the LinkedIn algorithm works.
So it's a short. I think it's a short, interesting, and powerful article. So, you want to elaborate a little bit on it?
Well, yeah. So what ended up happening is a guy I follow who I ended up interviewing for when he was HR over at Viacom. Um, I follow him on LinkedIn, and he wrote something uh, about he wrote something about um, not letting other people's opinions hold you back. And so we got into this dialogue, and it was just a line he wrote because I wrote something on him, and he thought it was philosophical, and he wrote something back, and I thought it was philosophical. And at the end of the day, he wrote, "You need to protect your fire." And it just hit me like immediately. The moment I read it, I just started writing, right? And it is one of those things where I feel like we tend to, as a people, because like civilization is based on acceptance. It always has been, and it's innate in us now because we learned it when we were younger, or not when we were younger, but during the caveman. You didn't want to get eaten by a dinosaur. You found a village, right? Because the more of you there were, then the safer you felt, and that has stayed within us our entire lives. And I don't have the documentation to back it up, but you Google it, I'm sure you find it. But that thought process is there, and so we live and die by how other people feel about us. We live and die by how our movements and our thoughts are processed by other people. And so with that, when it comes to um, moving on or finding that next new role or even being great within the role you're in, we are deflated so quickly by other people's thoughts. And so the point I was trying to make, and the point that Dwayne made to me, was essentially it's up to you to feed that fire, and not just feed it, but protect it from other people, right? You can't just throw wood into a fire. If it rains, it's going to go out, right? And the other people are the rain, right? And so, and sometimes we're the rain on ourselves. We're in our parade, but it's really important to do the work, be really good at the work, but keep other people's opinions as a grain of salt. Yeah, we need feedback. I'm a big fan and a big proponent of feedback. Um, you need it to survive, right? You need it to get to where you're going, but to a point, you got to make sure that you believe in yourself. And if someone says you're not good at something, you need to dissect why. Are they just saying that because you're better, or are they saying that because you actually aren't good? And if you actually aren't good, then what do you need to do to fix that, right? And that's just the wood that you're feeding the fire with. Um, but protecting the fire is just as important. Protecting yourself and your thought process and your your will is extremely important, and you have to live and die by you, right? And other people are important. They shape, they form, but they're not the end all be all. They're not there. If you when you do well or when you fail, you're on your own, man.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So that fire could be a metaphor for so many different things. It's just not one segmented to
Oh,
one
it's
particular.
everything. It's everything. It's like even like when I think about having kids, right? Like the end of the day, like when you look back on my life and you're like, should this guy really be responsible for two living beings? Like, can he, right? And that gets into my head. And for a long time, like my wife would tell you, I was in my head about what I was doing right or wrong, as if I was the first person in the history of having kids who had a kid who shouldn't have had a kid, right? And so it's one of those things where you have to realize what you're doing. You're like, yeah, well, yeah, like my daughter broke her foot, and for a week I thought she was lying. Like she fractured her foot. I was like, "You're fine, walk it off." And then we went to the doctor, and they were like, "Yeah, like her foot's broke." And so,
Oh
like
my goodness.
immediately, I was like, "I am the worst person in the world." Like the poor kid was complaining, um, but you can think about everything you've done right, right? And I think we forget. We take it all at face, well, we don't take it at face value sometimes, and but you have to sometimes say, well, you know what? She broke a foot, but I have health care that helped her get a cast on that foot, right? And so, like, where's the grain of salt in that, or
Yeah,
where's the benefit of it all, right? And so, that's what I mean. I think just looking at what you're doing well, and then what you need to fix, right? It doesn't need to be broken, but what can you work on? What can you tweak? And then understand that, yeah, you need people to help, because we don't all know everything, but we know someone who knows something, and using that to your benefit. But again, at the end of the day, it's you. If you allow people to deflate you, they will, right? And if you allow people to lift you up, they will as well. And the same thing goes for the self. If you deflate yourself, there's no one who can bring you out of it. You're on your
that's
own.
true. That's true. So a lot of people are really comfortable where they are right now, or they have been in the past, which kind of leads to what you said before, as far as you mentally can't see yourself being in a career in a job for 35 years. uh, and I guess I could say the same thing for myself, because you know I could have easily retired from the military 3 years ago. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, with a full pension, right? 20 years afterwards. But something in me, and while I was in the military, that just kind of said, "Hey, let me just explore outside of the military, and if I want to come back, which I didn't, by the way, I can still come back."
Yeah,
uh, but after 6 years of being in the military, I kind of saw the same thing too. And my father, he retired from his job, and he was in a role for a very long time. But that was his generation, their generation, man. They were gung ho of sticking it out for a couple
safety.
decades.
It was all safety.
Yeah, yeah, it's all that safety, right? So there's another article that you wrote about being uncomfortable, discomfort, right? So you find that as being a tool that you could keep in your back pocket, as far as discomfort is as a positive.
Yeah. So I a, a friend and a boss of mine when I was at the bank, Alfonso, he told me the value of the first person who speaks loses.
Ooh,
And and it's very salesy, right? But like
yeah,
it's one of those things where we've been taught that silence is such a bad thing that we try and
I think
fill
it's
the air as
powerful.
soon as possible, right? But I like the fact of asking someone, especially when I was in my coaching roles, asking someone something and just staring at them, like the beauty of watching them get uncomfortable and have to figure out the answer and waiting for you to say something to elaborate to give them a bit more. Like, no, no, no. I said what I wanted to say. I'm waiting for the response, right? And I think that that's true in the world. We're taught to be afraid of discomfort. We're taught to not embrace it, to disengage at any point when we get uncomfortable. I think that's where most people thrive, especially when you look at like startups, and any business really. You're solving a problem because you were uncomfortable, right? Either something wasn't working or it was taking too long, like, and that's where innovation comes in. That's where the solution comes. I think embracing that discomfort, whether it's in a role or within your marriage, and exploring. I think it was Kobe who said it, like exploring why it really scares you so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe in root cause, and breaking down things to the why, all the way until you can't explain it anymore. And if you root cause discomfort, you realize very quickly that it's something so simple that happened whenever you were small, that it's just stuck with you, and whatever the issue was affected you so hard, that any kind of discomfort now reminds you of that moment, right? And so you're trying to stay away from it. But if you engage with it and really dissect it, it's not that bad, right? Like giving speeches, people are deathly afraid of giving speeches
Yeah,
until you get the first word out, and then you're just talking, right? And I love that stuff, right? And people, um, like finding the ability to engage that discomfort, well, or uncomfort, whatever it may be, will make you stronger. You may still suck at something, and that's fine. Like, who cares, right? Just find the thing you don't suck at, and go on with your life. But
yeah,
like, if you don't try, you'll never know, right? And like I play ukulele now with my kids. Like my fingers are so mangled from different sports. Like I never thought I would be able to play this small little ukulele, but we have so much fun once a week. Um, and for them, them watching me do it, it makes them know like, hey, if Daddy can mess up, then we can mess up too. Who cares? And that's where like any role I've ever been in, especially where I coach people, I tell them like, dude, you need to screw up. Stop doing everything perfectly. You need to figure out what you don't know and go for it. And you'll learn so much more. If you do things perfectly every single time and it works out for you, you will never know that there's a whole world out there that like will eat you up. But
Oh
if you
yeah.
fail at something and you feel that anxiety around failing at it, and then at least take the next step to figure out why or what went wrong, every job you ever do, you'll have a good time. Like especially in like I come from marketing. It's all hypothetical. We throw an idea at the wall and hope for the best, right? And yes, now there's data involved and things like that. But at the end of the day, like the data from one thing does not influence something else that has never happened before.
Mm.
You could run the exact same campaign with the exact same control set, the exact same product, and it go horribly wrong.
Mm.
And that's where you get to dissect what went wrong, and even better, what went right, and what can I take that maybe just wasn't meant for this thing and apply to here.
Somewhere else, yeah.
Right? I always say if I had $1 billion, I would just take my days just looking at companies who had really cool things that they didn't know they had. Like, yeah, maybe the product's amazing, but never mind that. I want to look at the process. And can I take that process and reapply it somewhere else? Right. And that's like where the fun is, right? Controlling the pieces of the puzzle and being able to put it together different ways every single time. That's the stuff I actually live for, right? And that's where me talking to people comes into play because you get to learn so much and figure out what you don't know. Like I have no idea what I don't know until it comes up.
So,
Um,
so if you were to have the ability right now to select a company, a process, a product, a service that that one company or business doesn't even know, but you see some potential in it, and see what would that be? Have you ever you thought about it right now? This is the first time that I hear you say this, but
yeah,
I'm assuming that at some point you probably had that thought in your mind, and you probably say, hey, maybe maybe if I could get this in my head and just see it out in a different light, what would that be? I mean,
well, you know what?
obviously, your answer doesn't have to be perfect, and we this is
No,
this
no,
is it,
no. And
right?
like I thought of something just now, just because I was having this conversation with someone else about something completely different. But like I look at recycling
Okay.
and how archaic it actually is, and I say that with absolutely no experience or knowledge of it, but it just seems archaic because at a certain point you think about like a banana peel. If a banana peel has a piece of plastic sticker on it, it
Okay.
can't get composted. It has to go into garbage. So you think about like how many people don't clean out their jars and how many people like just leave shit in things. You know how much recycling is still ending up in the ocean, even though
Lot.
like we have to separate it and we have to do like right. And then I look at like a company like Adobe, which at the end of the day, and I was having this conversation with through like a pay it forward document. I was talking to the head of learning for Adobe, and he made it make sense because Adobe is a logistics company. It's not a software company. They happen to sell software, but it's a logistics company. So if
Yeah.
you took the logistics from Adobe and took the problem of recycling, could you combine those things? Is there something that works within that? If you took UPS or FedEx and any of those logistics companies that just happen to mail things, right, and applied those same operations to recycling, could you figure it out?
Hmm.
Would it be expensive? Probably. But could you figure it out? And I and
Uh,
I, I think you absolutely could. Like you look at I look at Amazon and they started buying Whole Foods. And everyone's like, what the hell is Amazon gonna do with Whole Foods? And I was like, well, they're gonna create like huge freezers. That's what they're gonna do. They're gonna have huge freezers for the delivery service. And that was me coming from New York where you had Fresh Direct and different deliveries for and here in Canada it's very specific to
to
the
the market.
grocery store who has it, right? And so they don't. There's no like delivery in that regard. Blahs, which would be like a Pathmark, they deliver. Walmart has pickup, things like that. That was like essentially they're just creating huge freezers to store their food, so that when someone in that area needs something delivered, it's there in an hour or
Hmm.
less. That's logistics. That's not. yeah, they deliver and they have a product, but they're actually making money on logistics, right? And so I don't think too many of us look behind the curtain. We look at the face value of something. Like you look at Facebook and you're like, oh, it's all about communication. No, it's all about data, right? You look at
That's
like
true.
even right, you look at like a Wayfair and it's all about operations. That's all. They just happen to do something that makes them tangible money, but the back end funds are in their operations and how they work. And I always think if you take the operations for something that does really well, that you don't even it does so well that you don't even think of it as an operations company and apply it to a real life problem like recycling and keeping the earth going. Like again, it'll be extremely expensive and no one wants to pay the money for it, but would it work?
I think
Right?
3M. I think 3M does something like that, where when you look at the the company 3M, a lot of people. There's a lot of products that have come from 3M that people would never even
Yeah,
consider is from
absolutely.
3M. But 3M, a lot of the products from 3M come from failure because
Yeah.
they just happen to fuck something up. And they're like, wait a second,
Putting
this
glue
fuck
on paper and calling it a post-it. Like
that
that was a
exactly.
mistake.
That was exactly
That was a
exactly.
multi-billion dollar mistake, right?
That's a classic case study, right? That's a classic business case study. But that's the point. I think that's kind of way the angle you're coming.
Yeah, I just think there's things that we can use or that we already use that we just have to like everyone's so concerned with innovation and they use it incorrectly in the first place, but everyone's so concerned with innovating and not necessarily fine tuning. I think that if we fine tune and redistribute it, you'd find that a lot of the things that we're spending trillions and billions of dollars to fix, we already have the capability to do it. We just haven't used our imaginations to transfer that skill set. We just continue using whatever it's supposed to be made for. But like, who's to say that a company that's been around for a long time, instead of just buying a startup who is working on something that you want to do, who's to say you don't have that already happening? You're just not really reimagining the product you have. Um, and again, going back to transferring of skill sets, that's where I live. That's my favorite place to be, right? And seeing what I can learn from banking that'll help me in marketing, and vice versa. Like going from marketing into a branch of banking, you got to all the hypothetical marketing that I did in terms of looking at demographics and having to speak to a million people within 30 seconds. I got to take that and apply it to a local branch and actually get feedback in real time, right? And it's scary at first, but then you realize it's much more, it's easier to do the job.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I had a leg up from a marketing standpoint and I had a leg down and absolutely having no idea how banking works. But once I found the pieces I understood, you have a structure that you can work from and expand. And now I can start to correlate things together as opposed to just trying to learn from scratch. Like a mortgage, I will never understand how to do a mortgage, but in terms of process and paperwork and customer conversation, understanding what the customer needs, what information I need from them to get them what they need. That's all problem solving, right? That's not rocket science. Um, but you have to be willing to take the time to find that one thing that you can hinge your entire plan on, and then actually do the work to expand it from there. And in that case, you don't have to do the same job for the rest of your life. You can pivot as many times as you want. You just have to find where the pieces fit together, right?
That's
Um,
true.
and I think our generation is more open to that. I don't think it's as calculated as I am. In some cases, most definitely, but I think for the most part, we kind of chase the opportunity. But I'm completing a puzzle, right? And so that uh, 10 years from now, when I'm doing what I actually want to do, I have all the pieces in play, and I understand how to budget, and I understand how to market, and how to take care of people, um, and complete the service. That's kind of where as I said at the beginning, it wasn't calculated up front, but in the last 5 years or so, it's become extremely calculated in how I kind of move and what I'm looking for.
So I see that Abney Strategy, right? You're obviously your background is in marketing because a lot of the your thought process is in marketing. First of all, what got you into marketing, and how? And then with Abney Strategy right now, the business that you co-founded, um, how has obviously the evolution of your skill sets and the marketing that you the marketing education that you acquired, how has that helped you be successful right now through Abney Strategy?
Yeah, I think so. I got my start in marketing. I got lucky and got an internship with BET, doing mobile marketing, with with big ads.
BET.
Yeah, big ads,
Are they still running?
streetwear. Yeah, they're absolutely, man. They're doing great. Um, I think they have a lot of opportunities they can capitalize on, and we'll see. Like a guy who I consider my mentor and my mentor from afar, Scott Mills is running it now, and he's a smart dude with a lot of experience in television and just people in general. So it'll be interesting where they go. But that's where I got kind of my marketing, and it was all ringtones and video games for the phone, and I got to morph my experience as mobile and digital started to morph. So as iPhones and Blackberries took off, more from a recreational standpoint, and not necessarily a business standpoint, I got to kind of grow with it, right? And so seeing all those pieces, social media being added to, and then the traditional marketing of television, billboards, and newspapers and mailers. Um, I again a puzzle, right? I like to see how all those pieces can work together and tell a massive story as opposed to telling the same story over and over again. And so that's where my marketing comes from is understanding how to build a brand by talking to people the way they expect to be talked to through the medium that they're on. I think we get into, and I wrote an article the other day about seeing an ad on television and thought it was an amazing ad, but then seeing the exact same ad on social, as media, right? And that's not how we digest. Like you and I, or even simplified even better. Me looking at my computer is a certain way. I look at my TV a certain way. I look at my phone a certain way. I read a certain way. I can't see the ad over and over again on all those mediums in the exact same way. I don't digest it the same way. But I like to look at things. If I tell marketing as a chapter book, and TV is one chapter of it, mobile is another chapter, and they're just telling you the progression of that brand, of that story. You start to digest it differently, and you start to actually understand where they're coming from. The hard part about that is trying to tell the beginning, middle, and end in a different way every single time. But if you can figure out that equation and do it, I think that's where a lot of companies have done really well. And not just living in the imagination world, but actually being able to be tactical in how they present a brand, build a brand over time, and then where they make that connection to engagement with the audience, right? Um, it is extremely easy to do. It's also extremely hard. You have to be authentic and at the same time talk to a million different people at once. It's hard, right? You have to do
Mhm.
it in 100 and or not even 30 seconds. So like in 60 something words, you have to be able to sell an experience to someone who is either black with 3 kids, black with no kids, black divorced, white with the same laundry list, right? It becomes very complicated. But I like to look at it from a simplistic standpoint. So what ended up happening is me and my wife launched Abney Strategy, and as my source of income and as both of our passion project because she's in PR and marketing and she's very creative, and I tell everyone she's much more successful than I am and much more smarter. But it's a way at a local level here in Ottawa to kind of help small businesses, and on a bigger level help startups who are trying to identify their brand identity or may even have one and trying to figure out ways to grow that identity and grow their footprint within whatever particular industry. Um, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I'm just fascinated by it all, right? And I think I've been lucky enough to touch so many different other industries, either in marketing or otherwise, that I have a little bit to offer to everyone. So being in the QSR world and seeing how that works, being working for agencies as a full service business development and creative strategist, working at Viacom and being able to work on massive budgets that include TV, digital, live events across like car industries and insurance and beverages. I've kind of had or I've definitely had a front row seat in a bunch of different areas. So I just try and use that all to help other companies, right? And so It's one of those things of combining all the pieces to get you to a sum. I think I have the ability to do that, and it's just fun. I genuinely like marketing. I like behaviors. I like influencing people to do something. I think it borders on evil genius sometimes, but I try and keep the white knight on my shoulder and make sure that I'm not going over to the dark side. But I think it's just fun to, especially when you're giving someone something that they need, right? And it needs a very loose term, but or want, right? But solving a problem for someone is fun for me, and the excitement on their face when that problem is solved is the justification that I'm on the right track. Um, so yeah, that's what Abney Strategy is. It's more of a branding and growth side of marketing, not necessarily the product side. But between me and my wife, we can kind of handle everything from a strategy point of view and even an activation point of view. And then going back to my relationships, I use all the different partners I've made here in Ottawa and abroad to fit a company with the solution. It may not be mine, right? I'm gonna be able to solve the problem, but I totally know who can, and I'll make sure that I facilitate that connection, right? And so um, there is some altruistic points of views in there, but I like just connecting dots, right? And if I can do that, I'm a kid in a candy store.
Nice. Now, I have seen a couple commercials here on the U.S. side where they, like what you mentioned before a couple of seconds ago, where you see one piece of content being distributed in the same content distributed in so many different ways. But now in the age of COVID-19, with social distancing, the masks, and all these other things, I think I saw one piece of one advertising from IKEA, which was pretty interesting. I don't know if it's the same over there in Canada, but I'll walk you through it. It basically starts off with saying, what are you going to do when basically the pandemic is over? Obviously, a lot of their perspective was that a lot of businesses are trying to sell, cruises or vacation packages, while they see it very different. They said, "Hey, I know what you're going to do. You're going to basically stay at home and visit family members, visit friends." So basically, selling their products because that's what they are, right?
Yeah.
They sell the, and I found that so interesting because a lot of the other commercials that I keep seeing are the same exact ones pre-COVID, which is like, wait a second, we can't fucking go out there and party. Like, I mean, people are still doing it. People are still doing it. But that change, they don't, again, I don't know. I'm not in that world that they're in right now, but it's just like, why don't put in the work to actually just edit a little bit of it or all of it, or just create new
Well,
content.
I think, see, the thing about marketing, and this is purely my opinion, but it's a did what they did mentality and has been for a long time. Well, that worked for them, so let's try and reapply it to us. And so you have a lot of things that just kind of are rebirths of something that happened, right? And you have that in any industry, especially life in general. It's cyclical. But I think in marketing, you have you have different industries who adopt things, and that's how it's supposed to work, right? You're supposed to learn, try and make something your own. I think we all fell into the hole of either trying to get people to remember what life used to be like pre-COVID, or trying to get them to understand that we understand what you're going through now, right? And so you hit the same commercial, the same open line, COVID's tough, or you're surviving. Like, yes, like we know you don't have to remind us of it. And I think that look at IKEA is aspirational, right? And not necessarily getting back to normal, because I think that's a black hole as well of everyone's the new normal and when will we get back to normal. I think saying like essentially how's your life going to change, because it's going to change. I think it's a more honest approach. And I was having this conversation, I forget with who, about the what the new behaviors will be like, because
Hmm.
we've been stuck inside, right? And so you have more home cooks, you have more gardeners, you have more do-it-yourself woodsmen. Like you have like so like post COVID, how many of that, of the billions of people who were affected, how many of those behaviors are going to stick? How many are going to revert back to what they were used to and start ordering again and wanting to go out? And yes, that's going to happen. You're going to have sides of everything. But you're going to have a whole population of people who got used to being home, who got used to being introverts, who got used to seeing their family more, who got used to working from home, right? And now, how are we going to cater to them? Because that's a whole new world, right? And now, yes, over time, however long that may be, things may go back to whatever their normal life was pre-COVID. But I would venture to say on the like, I'd bet against that for a bit because I think that people are going to get used to doing things on their own.
Yeah.
Um, and so, to IKEA's point, like instead of spending $20,000 on a trip, like spend the money and put it into your house and make your house your oasis. People were doing that before. They should continue to do it now, and I think you'll have more. It's an interesting, and that's why I look at everything from behavior perspective, right? Habits are one thing, behaviors are completely different. And I think if you can manipulate someone's behavior, you can go a long way, right? And it's just it's a very interesting commercial in terms of preparing people for doing it themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
As you're talking right now, the way that you phrased it kind of made me relate to my personal experience with in running. Um, so I'm an ultra marathon runner, and
Yeah,
I've done a lot of marathons where if you see marathons, you're surrounded by hundreds of people, thousands of people. The moment I actually started doing the ultra marathons, that behavior, like you mentioned, I was by my yes, I was with maybe a dozen people, 24 people at the start line, maybe hundreds of people at the start line. But there comes sporadic moments where you're by yourself for an
yeah,
extended period of time in the woods. So now when I have the opportunity to join a marathon, it's just kind of like, I'd rather just be my by my damn self, because I know that the
yeah.
expectations are, I could control I could control the situation a lot more than being in a marathon. So I can relate to what you said. So
Like I get into running, but like I'm not in running. Like I like, right? And so like I every so often like I went on this gung ho for like the last month minus like this week and last week where I was running a 5K every day. Just because I can't go to the gym and I like going to the gym. And after a while, I was like, I just can't run anymore. Like, I'm just not enjoying it. I don't know. Like, so, like, for me to even fathom running even a half marathon, like the mind exercises I would have to do before I even started running is just crazy. So anyone who can do a marathon or even like the triathlons, the ultra marathons, like more hat to you, man. You're
no, something that happened to me. The reasons that why I got into ultra marathons was because of my daughter. This goes back to when she was first born. And before that, yeah, I ran a little bit. I obviously clearly ran in the military. Clearly ran when I was in college because of because of rugby and whatnot. But um, the stuff that she went through kind of got me into long distance running. Basically, she was born with a health condition, and it got me going through very tough times. Picking up alcohol and seeing myself going down the wrong path. So I decided to back off of that substance, and just looking for that type of high in a different
yeah,
location, which was running. Right. Fast forward to now, I went through an MBA program. I was in corporate America, and I saw myself just deviated. I just was not even running at all because I was so focused in climbing the corporate ladder
yeah,
that at some point I said, "This is bullshit. This is never going to happen." Then I started my own business, uh, and through that process of starting my own, I never had time to really work out. So now that this happened, this pandemic happened around the world, it just pretty much froze everybody. It froze me
yeah,
to the point where it's just like, all right, now what am I? So I just went back to what I kind of knew what to do in these type of situations, which is health, right?
yeah,
I never really looked at self the health perspective as I do now. Where before I just did it just because I knew it felt good. I knew it was good for me, for my body. But now it's just I see how the benefits of it are a lot better. Maybe it came with age, I guess, but we've all heard it before, right? Some 30
yeah.
minutes of exercise a day, it goes a long way. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the past since we went into quarantine. I just set out this ambitious goal of running 1,000 miles by the end of 2020. Um, I just I just literally just put that
Uh,
shit out there. I was like, let me just do it. So I've been holding myself accountable by actually putting it on social media because it's so
yeah,
easy. Just
it's a
it's
deviate from it, dude. Like and
it's
that's
so
where
easy. It's so easy just to say I'm not gonna go running today.
like
So I
even
say,
going to the gym because I go to the gym at 4:30 in the morning, right? And so I see the same seven people, and like it's easy for them to call me out and say like, "Dude, you haven't been here. We can see it." Whereas now I can't go, so like there's no one. I'm afraid. Like my wife, I'm with her every day, so I look exactly the same no matter what, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, like
one of
shallow how.
yeah, like so it's like one of those things where like I don't like like my daughter has asthma, so like we have to, and my wife has it too. So we have to, and then her parents have MS and dementia, so all immunodeficiency. So we have to be very, very strategic
Cautious.
in
Yeah.
what we do, right? And so, like me and my brother-in-law, because he's a gym nut too, right? And so you're like, well, we just gotta build a gym in the garage, like a full out gym, and because that's the only way I'll make sure that I'm doing something. Because me to wake up like now I sleep until like 7. Like, actually, my eyes open at 5:45 and I stay in bed for an hour,
My
right?
eyes
I have
open.
nothing else to
My
do. I
my
have
eyes.
nothing like because again, for 4 years I've been going to the gym at 4:30 in the morning every day, and so now my body's like, dude, you know you have someplace to be. You got nowhere to go, right? And so I try to do the running thing, but now I just go for walks because I can't. I don't have I don't know whether it's patience or if like this is part of my mind always wandering. I just can't sit there and run for a long period of time, whether I'm on a treadmill or running through nature. I get bored very quickly, and I'm like, you know what? Like, I just can't do this anymore.
Listen, try some fartleks. Have you heard of fartleks before?
No, I don't know.
So
Explain.
fartleks are is a fartlek. The word fartleks is a Swedish word, and it basically has migrated into the running world where a fartlek is essentially you choose a distance. Let's say you said you've done 5Ks. Let's say you want to increase it by 2Ks. Right now you're doing 7K. The whole point of a fartlek is to not stop whatsoever. However, you could go as slow or as fast as you want to. So what you're doing is essentially, let's say you start off wherever you live in, and you start to jog a little bit, and you see a stop sign. You're like, you know what? I'm gonna go run to that stop sign as fast as I can, just to get your heart rate up. And
Yeah,
as soon as you get to that, you don't stop. You just continue as slow as you can until then you say, oh, that black car on the next block, I'm gonna jog as smoothly as I can, and then you basically identifying objects
yeah. So
in your
you're kind of
surroundings.
running like little circuits within the total run, and
Exactly,
not
because
necessarily in order, but you could be sprinting, you could be jogging.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, because
I
I could
like.
be, we could have a coaching conversation where I would say, "Hey, Rob, I want you to basically do 300 meters at, I don't know, I want you to do 3 sets of 100 meters in 20 seconds."
Yeah,
Now I'm forcing you to get on a go. But if I tell you, "Hey, dude, just go out there and
out there
run
and do something.
300 meters, and if it takes you fucking a minute per 100 meter, just do it." You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
it's just a
yeah, and
fun way
that
of
and
doing
that makes sense because even when I was training, like to get back into the 5K world, like I started with the run for 30 seconds, off for 2 minutes, then run for an hour or for a minute, off for a minute, run for a minute and a half, off for a half a minute, and then keeping that half a minute as the rest, but kind of working up until I could run 3 or 4 minutes at a time, and then it took off from there. It's kind of the same thing, only a bit less structured, which I like it.
Let me just ask one final question because I know
Yeah, yeah.
you're a busy man. So the article that kind of got me interested to chat with you was one that you started off with describing yourself. You're 6 feet. You're 6'4". You mentioned in the article that you weigh 260 pounds. And when people look at you, it's just when I'm reading it, I'm kind of like, all right, I know who you are. People kind of see me and it's just kind of like, all right. So I'm kind of putting myself into that same
Yeah,
article, 5'10", I'm 200 pounds. It's just like, but people, they don't see behind that, right? I have a 4-year-old and a 12-year-old. And you mentioned in that article that you're forced to understand how to find your place in the world
yeah,
and how it should be, right? So
yeah. Like I wrote that obviously everything had just happened with George Floyd, and it was one of those things because what kept coming up when I was talking to people of different races and that I've known for a long time or a short period of time was the line "I'll never understand," and I find that to be a cop out because
A cop out to have a conversation, or a cop out just to.
yeah, cop out to kind of say the thought process behind "I'll never understand" means you don't want to, right?
Okay, okay.
You and like not to blanket it, but it's essentially what it means because you can understand something without going to. I'll never understand what it's like to be a woman like during the menstrual cycle. But I've been with my wife for a really long time, and I know, and sisters and like I've had a lot of women in my life. I can deduce like how much it can suck, the different levels that it can go, right? And so, and that's just the first example because I've been around women my entire life.
No, dude, I think it's a I think it's a valid point because you have two children, I have two children.
Yeah,
I have two children with two different women, and they both went through a C-section. And
yeah,
dude, all power to them because I would never really truly, although
yeah.
I could say I could never truly understand, but I could comprehend.
My wife used to always go, "You could never have birth," and I went, "Absolutely! Like you are absolutely right. Like I'm not gonna fight you on that. Like I stubbed my toe, it hurts a lot, but it's one
Yeah.
of those things where like I was not necessarily getting frustrated, but I needed people to, or at least wanted people to understand the thought process that I have to go through, right? And so, like, from being told at an early age how to deal with police to having two girls who are Portuguese and black, and one's extremely light and one's much darker, and having to really have to explain to them the two different lives that they're going to lead, right? Like my oldest, who's light and hugs people and loves people, and my youngest, who is like me and brute and not like she's a 10-foot pole, right? And so it's one of those things where people need to try to understand. No, you're not going to get it. You're not going to have to live with it forever, but you need to understand what it's like for an African American who, whether they're educated or not, doesn't matter. They may be a good person or not. Again, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter one way or another once they step outside of their home because they were taught. We were all taught different sides of it, but we were all taught that black people can be dangerous, and um, not just by our parents, but just by civilization. It goes back to the caveman theory, right? And needing someone to be next to you to feel safe. We learned for a long time that black people are stronger than white people. They're taller. They can do much more. They could hurt you much more. You go into a dictionary, the terms for dark and the terms for light have different positive and negative terms associated to them, right? Respectively. And so, um, for me to be 6'4", and yes, once you get to know me, I would hope that people love me and they know that I just like solving problems and helping people. But walking down the street, you don't know that. You don't know me from a hole in the wall. And especially now, pre or post COVID, like even before, I wore sweats and a t-shirt. And now I still do. So like you'd never know that I was well spoken if you don't speak to me. You never know that I, in my opinion, was successful if you never sat next to me for more than 5 minutes, right? And
Yeah.
so even the imagery of walking with my two little girls and skipping and literally singing songs like we do it all the time, the fear that that still gives people, and being the marketer or even just the people watcher, I see it. I've always noticed it. I can't help it. And so you see in my mind, I'm like, well, if me holding my kids and skipping scares you, then what's it like when I'm by myself and I'm on my headphones or I'm yelling into the phone because someone pissed me off, right? That must be scaring the shit out of you, right? And
Yeah.
so like, it's one of the it's a interesting case study in just people needing to understand to a certain level what black people have to go through. Likewise, people understanding what it must be like for a trans or a gay or a lesbian woman, like right? It's one of those things where we try and shy away from it. right? And like even like the other day or yesterday with Deshaun Jackson and the quoting Hitler, right? And in my mind, I'm like, in what world did you think that that was going to get across whatever point you were trying to make, no matter how pure that point may have been? You don't quote Hitler. Like it's not something you do, but like for to understand what it's like to be Jewish, like right, and the stereotypes against that. If I don't like being called a criminal all the time, do you think all Jews like being called money hungry?
No,
Right,
no.
and so and yes, there's success in both. There's also failures in both cultures and all cultures, right? But we need to try and understand where it all comes from. We need to try and understand what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, and that's the only way you can get empathy. That's the
Yeah,
only way you can get apathy is if you try and understand. And I don't think we've all been taught to try and understand. We've been taught to live in our bubbles, take care of ourselves, right? And I just don't come from that world. I've had too much experience with too many other different cultures and become such great friends with so many great people um, on any side of the line. It's been like one of my great mentors is a gay black man. Like, and to this day, 13 years later, I still reach out when I have a question because he's the smartest, most caring man I know, right? And so, like, the fact that we're all giving up so many abilities or opportunities to learn something and learn more because of who we decide we don't want to be next to or are associated with is kind of crazy to me, and just the simplistic view of just trying to understand someone past their background, past their color, and just as a person. I think it's a pretty easy thing to do, and you realize very quickly that I don't really have to be afraid of certain people. I don't really have to be afraid of all things until the danger presents itself, and then yeah, maybe it's too late. But I'll take that chance, right? Because I do it anyway, and so understanding that we all have two eyes, a nose, a mouth. Like my daughter said it the best. She said, "But we're all the same inside," and I just didn't know how to I didn't know how to explain to her that she was wrong because she was absolutely right. And I was like, well, you know what? Like I can't. That's the end of the conversation. I can't really. Right? How am I supposed to teach you black and white and teach you how to be how you should carry yourself around someone when you hit me with that fact? Like
yeah.
we're all the same color inside. And I was like, you know what? If everyone lived their life that way,
It'll
we'd
be
be in
much
a
simpler.
better
Yeah.
place.
So, so I see that your shirt is Brazil, right? The Brazil.
No, this is actually ironically, this is I took this from my father-in-law. It's a hemp shirt.
Oh, it looks from this angle, it looks like the Brazilian flag. No, but the I guess the reason why I was mentioning this is because one thing that I miss a lot is traveling, man. I think when you travel, you get to see all these, you get to break all these different whatever they are, stereotypes or ways that you can perceive people. If obviously I'm not a white American, but if I was a white American traveling elsewhere outside of America, shit would be different. I
Yeah,
clearly
absolutely.
because it's just it just is. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I used to live in Russia. I used to live in Bosnia, and obviously, clearly, I'm not Russian. Clearly, I'm not Bosnian. But a smile goes a long way. I like to say that a lot because I think that's I
Absolutely.
connect with people like that with smiling. And the reason why I mentioned it is that a shirt about Brazil is because I remember going to Brazil, and you said your wife is Brazilian, is
It's Portuguese, yeah. Half
Portuguese.
Brazilian, half Portuguese. Yeah.
Okay, have you been to Brazil before? I assume, right?
I haven't yet. We went to Portugal last year, the year before, but I haven't been to Brazil. I can't wait to go.
Okay, there's a small hole in the wall, which is called Beep Beep. Hopefully, it's still open when you go there. So BIP. If you look, it's not. They don't have a website. It's literally a
Yeah.
hole in the wall. Let me walk you through this. So, my wife and I went. Well, at the time, it was just my girlfriend. Um, my wife and I went. We went down there to the World Cup, and by sheer luck, we stayed at a. We rented uh, Airbnb, and we were looking for places to go. I picked up a magazine. I think it was Time Out, Rio, and it said beep beep, and I was like, what the heck is this all about? So we went. Yeah, I went there. I like to explore, right? It was middle of the night. She's like, "You sure we're safe?" I'm like, "Man, come on, let's just go. We're fine. We're both Latinos. We look
You
Brazilian.
figure it out.
We'll figure it out." Rob, and I tell you, the music and the samba that we're playing was all live music, and literally is the size is small, way smaller than what I'm looking at right there behind you, and
Yeah,
it's basically it was a rectangle. Maybe could have been the size of the width of my arms, as far as the width, and the length could have been probably 40 feet. But the point was that the owner was sitting outside, sitting down in a plastic chair with a plastic table. There was no waiters at all. So basically, I was trying to navigate how can I get a beer
yeah,
in the middle of just people dancing on the street because there is nowhere to go inside. The only people allowed to sit inside are the musicians.
yeah.
So then I figured out by asking people that spoke Portuguese. Some people, a lot, nobody spoke English. Because I speak Spanish, we were able to communicate. They said,
Heck
"Oh,
yeah,
yeah, you have to go there and ask that gentleman, or tell that guy that you're gonna go get a beer." So basically, this guy, he knew who you were, he communicated with you, and I got to realize after 5 days of me going there repetitively that he knew who you were, and he documented every single can of beer or every shot of whiskey you drank, and he'll fucking charge you. He's like, and they had hundreds of people. It's like, how in the
yeah,
world was this guy? But basically, the point I'm trying to make is that in this one little small microcosm of Rio de Janeiro was a melting pot of the whole world,
yeah,
right? And unfortunately, I wish that you know a lot of Americans here would be able to see the beauty of just the diversity of people. That is just, to your daughter's point, we're all the same inside, but at the same time, people just perceive it very, very differently in so many different ways.
we're
Or the
taught,
world.
right? I think the worst part about being smart is we were taught things, right? And so, right, and I say that because we're smarter than certain animals, depending on who you talk to, we're smarter than certain insects. But like we have the ability to communicate, and that's not always a good thing, because then you have ideas, and then you have to facilitate those ideas and navigate those ideas. And one of them is race. Like it's a human race. It's not like white, black. Just because I don't tan as much, right? Or in my case, I tan more than certain doesn't mean I'm a different person. I still have to use the bathroom. I get cut. I bleed. Like all these
Yeah,
things, we're so similar, and we see them for differences. I think, like to your point about going places, I wrote a post on Instagram once about taking my kids to Italy, and I just because I only enjoyed school as far as having people there to enjoy it with. I didn't necessarily like 9 to 5 of reading a book and taking a test. Like I ended up going into marketing as a major because there were no math tests. Like I simply had to write a bunch of things, and I can write and bullshit any day of the week, right? And so it was just easier. But like the ability to go somewhere else, and even if you speak a different language, being able to communicate, like
it's
going
a
to Italy
beautiful
and
thing.
watching my kids play with other kids, meet other people. Any hotel or bed and breakfast we stayed at, they made friends with the people who were there, and we did too. And again, like, and it wasn't necessarily Italian and us; it was like people from Russia and people from China and people from Tokyo. Like it was, but we all spoke relaxation, right? We all spoke wine. We all spoke pasta, and so you quickly can navigate those conversations. I think that those are the biggest learning blocks, is being able to communicate with people and talk to people and learn from people. You won't get that in education. Like the school teaches you how to be structured, it doesn't actually teach you anything. um, like the things that you need. Like if it taught me how to do taxes, I'd be amazed. But like it teaches you structure, and certain people can survive within that, some people can't.
Yeah,
And it's an interesting, like when you look, they did a test. I forget who did a test, and they followed a high school from graduation through the end of college. And so what they realized was that the slackies who barely graduated, when they got to college, they did well because they got to use their imagination. All of the valedictorians and the smartest kids of the class, yes, they may have done well, but they didn't have as high a trajectory as the kids who did crappy because they were so used to structure. When you get to college, it's all up to you. You kind of build your own adventure, right? And they couldn't live in that world. They had to have some type of structure, and
Yeah.
it's a very hit or miss place. But when you talk about the education of people and learning things, I learned more in these last month or two of talking to people via Zoom conversations than I have any day of a marketing course, right? And getting some real life uh, uh, explanations on things as opposed to the theoretical explanation of it. It's so much more value there, right? And so I always say, if you can travel, if you can take your kids somewhere. My wife sent me a blog once. It was called "Take the Trip," and it said, "Well, we can't afford it, but we're going to do it, right? Because the value in that is exponential, and then obviously live within your means. But like, I have friends who've never left a certain area of their block. They may have gone into New York City, but that's about as far as they've gone. They haven't seen the world as it is, or even a different state as it is. Which I like. There's something that has to be done about that. Like you need to realize that there's a bigger world out there, and it's
Of
hard to
course.
imagine it. You need to see it, right? And
Yeah.
so, like I always say, in terms of education, um, going places and meeting people is the best education you could possibly get, right? And not just for brain power, but for your soul. Like you need to. It makes you a good person, a better person, because you get to see that there are people who speak a different language, who may even have more money than you, but they have the exact same problems, right?
Of
You're
course.
looking for the exact same answers, and you could possibly help them, and vice versa.
Of
But
course.
you don't know if you don't talk to people, right?
Of course. Man, I can see this conversation go on and on and
Oh,
on.
go forever. I can talk forever, dude.
No, same here,
We'll
Rob.
do a part two sometime, man. I'm down.
We'll do a part two. Rob, thank you so much. And I didn't even get a chance to introduce you at the beginning
Yeah,
because we just
yeah,
started rolling. So you want to introduce yourself and just say a little bit of yourself?
yeah, yeah. Name is Rob Abney. Living in Canada, fun times. Um, Co-owner and co-founder of Abney Strategy, marketing and branding company. And just a naturally curious person. So
Nice.
that's got me to where I am, is just curiosity and asking questions.
All right, Rob. Thank you so much. I know you're a busy man, my friend. Thank you so much for being here, and definitely a
Thank
part
you.
two coming up. All right.
Absolutely. Let me know, man. I'm down.
All right. So.